Welcome to the Mindful Millennial Podcast, where host Seth Marcus dissects and discusses all things impacting the millennial mind. Mentors, peers, and professionals share intimate conversations on subjects such as entrepreneurship, exercise and health, the blessings and curses of technology, travel, and how to navigate adulthood in this age of information. We're the largest generation in history, and we dictate the future. The Mindful Millennial finds the signal through the noise.
Hey everyone. It's good to be back on the microphone delivering another awesome MindMill episode. In this episode, we touch on the power of perspective, and I wanted to express how perspective has been shaping me recently. A wise person once told me that by simply rephrasing, quote, I have to do something, to, quote, I get to do something, it instantaneously changes the trajectory of that task. Think about it. One is a commitment to a non-desirable, while the other is an appreciation for the capability and opportunity to be of service. The task will always remain the same, but the attitude dictates how we view it and, more importantly, how we execute it. It doesn't really matter if it's picking up trash, picking apart a budget, or picking the next starting quarterback for the Broncos. The task is set before you, and you choose how to view it. Don't get me wrong. There are countless things in the day that us grown-ups do not want to do. But is it better to approach life with an attitude of excellence and gratitude, or an attitude of avoidance and minimal effort? So I say this to myself as well as to all of you. Take on that BS. Face it head on, and use it as an opportunity to learn and strengthen your resolve. What are you dreading doing today? Why do you dread doing it? What would be the positive effects of performing and completing it? How do you feel when you complete something that you've been avoiding? How can you shift your attitude around the work that's right before you? How you do anything is how you do everything. Today, I get to do something that I love. Introduce a new episode on the MindMill Podcast. Today, we were with Keri Bergeron, physical therapist, yoga teacher, and Lululemon Ambassador. Keri is one of the most educated and integrated health professionals I have ever met. Her combined knowledge of Eastern and Western practices gives her a unique expertise when working with her students and her clients. Keri and I share the philosophy of teaching and instilling autonomy. Self-care starts from within. By learning and practicing healthy routines, we build a lifestyle of health and happiness. Keri is an incredible wealth of knowledge, and she has recently created a program teaching mindfulness, stretching, and breath work to youths. Her program is carefully tailored to introduce mindfulness practices in a manner that is approachable and, most importantly, replicable for a young person. Working directly with schools, Keri's program is positively affecting the student body, building the community, as well as building lifelong tools for its participants. In this episode, Keri and I dive deep into breathwork, yoga, entrepreneurship, and working with young adults. We discuss mental resistance and how it pertains to both the beginner and the advanced yogi, and also how we experience it within our lives. We also chat about screen use in schools, how the problem is systemic, and how we can begin to reclaim the attention spans of the younger generation. As a bonus, Keri shares her stress breath practice that she uses to introduce beginners and skeptics to the power of meditation. Keri Bergeron is a joy to experience, and I'm so grateful for her time and her story on this episode of the MindMill Podcast. Keri Bergeron, welcome to the MindMill.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I told you right before we started recording that I woke up, I was getting my day going, and glanced at my calendar and realized that we had a 9 o'clock call time rather than a 10 o'clock. And I was like, all right, it's time to boogie.
Here we go.
So here we are. Everything is cool, and I'm really excited to get to know you.
Me too.
I wanted to ask you something first. I haven't been to yoga in... Me thinking of how long it's been is not a good sign. I think it's been about 2 or 3 weeks. I was traveling, and then last week I didn't get there at all.
Okay.
And I feel like a junkie in withdrawal right now.
Totally.
And I'm wondering, like,
know that feeling.
I see that you've been practicing for about a decade, right? Or
2
decades?
Close.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you fallen into lulls? Have you fallen these like breaks where you kind of forget the passion of it, and then somehow you find it back?
Life gets in the way. You get out of the routine. You have to consciously make a choice to step back into it. And
what usually is the calling? Is it a mental or a physical
I think
drain?
over time that's changed. I think initially it was physical that I felt missing the most. And over the years, it's become a little bit more of the internal steadiness that I miss. And of course, it depends on what's happening in the rest of life as to what calls me back. But yeah, I would say it's more that sort of internal calm and steadiness that pulls me back every time.
Right.
Or lack of it that pulls me back.
I find that for some reason I'll be more apt to go to like a weightlifting class or session or run or do something a little bit more intense when I've kind of fallen out of a routine for a bit. I'll like try to kickstart it rather than make it to yoga, and I'm always so disappointed when my body starts to fail me, and then I realize I just haven't been practicing.
Right.
It seems to really be the glue, pulls everything together.
Well, balancing ourselves out in so many different ways. I think the physical strength that so many of us in Colorado really seek, whether it's outdoor activities or physical activities in the gym or whatever it happens to be, but also how busy all of our lives always are, and really taking the time to do the things that fill the cup back up. And I know for me, being outdoors does that. Being in the gym, I love that too, but it doesn't quite have the same effect for me as the specific mindfulness piece does.
What do you think is the key difference between the yoga and, say, trail running or being outdoors?
I know some people get the same effects with running. I would consider myself a jogger rather than a runner. I don't have a personal connection to that runner's high sort of feeling. But for me, with the practice of yoga and meditation, it's the paying attention on purpose.
Absolutely.
That separates it for me.
Yeah, I agree. I recently, within the last, I guess, 2.5, 3 years now, adopted a meditation practice, and it came as such a relation to yoga. Most people start doing yoga for the physical aspects. They want to become more flexible, or they just see how that it's trendy.
Cross training.
Right. Like kind of a recovery day to diversify their workout routine. But in the process, you start to understand the awareness in your toes and letting your jaw release and core awareness and all these different little intricacies of the yoga practice, and the meditation being this kind of like back, what's the word for it? In like the depths of your computer, you know, you're like slowly, you're kind of meditating, but you don't really know it until you realize at the end of the class or after a few years of practice of the calming effects of the mentality.
You know, I think that asana, the physical postures of yoga, is the perfect preparation for meditation. And back in the OG days of yoga, that's all the physical postures were used for, is to prepare you to sit for many hours at a time. Of course, we've developed many more physical postures since then, but exactly what you said about over time, you develop this expanded awareness of what's happening in your toes, of where you could soften a little bit. And that expanding awareness in the physical practice, I think, clears the mental fog, the sort of excess mind stuff, so that we Westerners can sit still with ourselves and practice meditation.
I knew that people would do yoga in order to prepare for meditation, but in a lot of current modern classes, a lot of people try to inspire meditation first. And I never quite understood that. I always thought it was more difficult to calm your mind and then get into the asana than to open up your body, kind of get all the jitters out, and then you can be very still towards the end of class. Right.
And that's my experience as well, personally, but also in teaching. And I just think Western culture, it's so nonstop. We're constantly getting it done and checking it off the list and on to the next thing. And I forgot to call so-and-so. It's this constant barrage of thoughts and doing. Yeah. And so for me to transition from all of the doing into stillness instantly is really challenging. So the asana practice is the gateway for me, for sure. Mornings are another time that I think is easier for me to sit because I haven't really started the wheels turning yet. And I can really sit and do the things that we talked about with the asana, really feel my feet grounded on the floor, feel both of my hips equally anchored on a cushion, can do some breath work, and then meditation as a way to set the tone for the day versus once I've been going and going, trying to stop on a dime really and sit still has not been the most effective for me either.
No, me neither. So would you mind walking us through your morning routine?
Sure.
I always love hearing about these.
I know some people wake up, use the bathroom, sit sort of thing. I need to wake up, have the coffee, sit.
Okay. Coffee first.
Yes, I do the coffee first. because I notice for myself, if I sit down immediately, I can be a little bit sleepy and not dedicate my full attention. Sometimes instead of the coffee, it'll be sun salutations or a more vigorous breath practice to get things firing before the meditation. But one of those, movement or breath or a little bit of coffee and futzing about, and then I can sit. Yeah, that's the basics.
So how much coffee before meditation? Me personally, I can't do it. I have to wait about an hour, maybe 2 hours before I start drinking coffee.
Okay.
Which I know is different. A lot of people, it's coffee first. But if I drink coffee and then meditate, I'm in that to-do list. I think I'm more anxiety prone than living in the past.
Yeah.
Some people will go either way, but when I'm meditating, obviously the idea is to be present. And when I'm have coffee in me, or if I just have this high energy, this high vibration, I find myself leaving the present and I'm like creating these lists. I'm running through scenarios in my mind. What am I going to say to Keri today? Sort of you know,
I'm a 1 cup of coffee person a day. So I have my coffee, wash my face, and get myself situated. I don't go into the lists yet. Usually after I meditate, I stand up and look at my schedule for the day and what do I have to prepare myself for, and what do I have to bring, and what do I need to pack up, and those sorts of things. But try not to look at the schedule until after. So that.
And that's on your phone, I imagine?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
I always judge myself how good the day is going to be by whether or not I wake up and I start looking at my phone, or I wake up and I go through some version of a morning routine. I find that as long as I'm 60 to 70% of like a perfect morning routine, it just makes your day's trajectory so much more positive.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah, of course. I feel that for me, social media can be a big distraction. So if I wake up and start looking at social media, instantly wheels are turning about what I'm doing, what I'm not doing. You know, the whole comparison routine, which is sort of inevitable, I feel like, with social media. And so that will get my wheels turning and make me unable to focus. I notice when I do that, I'm far less successful in my morning routine. So if I leave it alone until after, then I'm much more able to focus.
Intentional social media use is probably the most difficult aspect of marketing I've experienced. Getting on Facebook or Instagram for a specific purpose and finding the program usually wins. Before you know it, you're just digesting all of these videos or photos. You're diving into different people's, like what they're up to. And maybe in the back of your head, you're justifying that that's somehow building you, but is it?
Right.
I don't think it is. There's concentrated research, like for me, looking up how other podcasters are marketing. That's just a small fraction of the amount of people doing yoga or mindfulness work and using social media to promote that. It's an endless downward spiral. This rabbit hole of imagery, and it's all a highlight reel too.
Absolutely.
So you find yourself in kind of a weaker state of mind. At least this is me. When I'm in bed, I should be either reading or trying to get some extra sleep or, you know, anything. And instead I'm getting blue light and screens in my eyes right before bed or right as I wake up. My weakest time mentally is when I'm like, I just want to be on my phone and see what's going on in the world. It's so important to kind of like nip that and put it in its place.
Well, I think it's so hard because we're so stimulated all day long, whether it's television or it's social media or whatever it happens to be. I think we all want a few minutes to stop the thinking and stop the wheels turning in our brains. And so putting our faces in front of a screen is a quick and easy way to shut down the engines. But on the other hand, on the other side of that coin, we're also disconnecting from where we most want to go. And I should speak for myself. I'm disconnecting from where I most want to go, comparing to what other people are doing, because it's so pervasive in the Western yoga world because we're all independent contractors. Virtually no one's an employee. There are no benefits, those types of things with a full-time job. And so you do have to market yourself. You do have to have a presence on social media. You do have to, I think, engage in it so that people know what you're up to and those sorts of things. But yes, it is a challenge to be mindful about putting yourself out there in an authentic way and not spending all of my time consuming what other people are doing and comparing what I am not doing to everyone else.
It's very challenging, and there is no rule book. It's only been in the mainstream for a decade, 15 years at that, and it just gets more and more powerful, and yet there is no real socially accepted method of consuming it. There's people who use it to avoid seemingly awkward situations, whether they're in a line at a grocery store or at a waiting room or sitting in a red light or at a party. There seems to be no social barriers to when to be aimlessly on your phone.
Right.
And I think that's a genuine problem, especially for the younger generations, because it seems like as it gets younger, the investment into social media seems to rise.
Yeah.
And I don't have a solution. I was going to lay it on you. I was like, what's the solution?
Figure it all out here. It is so interesting to have conversations with friends and to think about the times when you would meet someone at a restaurant for dinner or a drink or whatever, and whoever gets there first would sit and observe the scene, or
get to know,
heaven forbid, converse with someone,
another patron.
But now I'm totally guilty of this myself. I'm sitting by myself at the bar, pull out the phone and scroll for a couple of minutes and miss the opportunity to connect with what's happening in front of me.
And there's such a starved population for genuine connection. And there's so many opportunities to connect with people throughout the day that are surrendered to, well, I'll just be on my phone. That's easy. Yeah, luckily here where we are recording right now, this is my home. And when I will have people over, I've come up with a decent way to express that this isn't a place to be on your phone. Obviously, we're in my office and there's lots of screens and there's so much utility to it. But when we're here for dinner and it's like a small get together with new faces, it's just not appropriate. And I know I've been guilty of it before. I think we all have, but it's so crucial to minimize the amount of cyber connectivity in order to allow space and some sort of potential genuine connectivity, which just never happens.
And I know sometimes for me, when I'm feeling sort of at my capacity or physically or energetically exhausted, that it can be tempting to be on the screen instead of to have that in-person connection. I'm too tired for that, whatever. But I find for myself that when I do invest in that interpersonal connection, that it really does fill me up. So I think sometimes it can be this feeling of I'm too tired, I can't do that. But at least for me, that exchange of energy really does make a difference.
It's what we're programmed to do.
Yeah.
We need to have a tribe. We need to connect with other humans.
Yeah.
And there was never a time when it was like, I want to connect over an invisible network, but not with the human right in front of me.
Right.
It's just very interesting. So when we were preparing for the interview, you were telling me that you've been working in schools and teaching mindfulness. I have so many questions, but in relation to what we're talking about, have you noticed that the phones are an issue in bringing mindfulness to the younger generations? Yeah.
So I have to ask them specifically to put their phones away with their backpacks on the sides of the room, away from what we're doing. But yes, it is a tricky balance because so many of them are in communication with their parents, for example, over the phone, and I need to know if my mom calls. And so it's sort of a balance between drawing the boundaries, but also letting go a little bit. So if they have to go check their phone for a second and then come back, but hopefully it doesn't turn into a scrolling situation while they're checking to see if their mom called.
What time of day do you normally?
Afternoon.
After the school. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a little bit more sense than in the middle of the day, them justifying going there.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm just getting started with this. It's been not quite a year that I've been in one of the Title I schools here in Denver and teaching a class for the kids after school once a week and a class for the teachers once a week, and have been brainstorming other ideas to get more connected and have been making connections with local nonprofits to partner with something a little bit bigger. But I feel like I'm just learning. I'm just scratching the surface with working with kids. But I feel like it's so important for all kids, but especially these kids and their families would not have access to a yoga studio. So it feels really important to share the tools and try to teach these kids ways to self-regulate, ways to feel like they have some agency over themselves, because I think so much of what's happening in their lives feels out of their control. So yeah, that's the latest passion.
Awesome. Well, I commend you for doing that, as well as admitting that you're still learning. We're all faking it till we make it, right? There's no one out there that is a genuine expert that is just in cruise control doing everything right.
Right.
And that's such a noble goal. And I wish I had an opportunity like that when I was a kid. Although when I was a kid, I probably wouldn't even, I'd be like, no, I'm not doing anything after school.
Exactly.
I'm done.
Exactly.
But it's just such a cornerstone of my life now. And you really start to think about your life before some sort of mindfulness practice and after. And
dramatically different.
And if you can change one, a dozen, 300 kids and bring that moment of clarity earlier in their lives, that's amazing. It's life-changing, Keri.
Can I tell you a quick story?
Please. That's why we're here.
I, a couple of weeks ago, went in to teach. The PE teacher allowed me to come in as a guest teacher. Because I'm teaching after school, it's self-selected, so it's a smaller group of kids, because kids have sports or jobs or have to go home when their parents can pick them up or whatever it happens to be. So I asked the PE teacher if I could be a guest teacher to get in front of more kids, not only as a way to potentially feed the after school program, but to, again, just expose more kids to the tools.
Right.
And I asked them not to call it yoga because I didn't want any preconceived ideas, or there's no way I'm sticking my rear end in the air in front of my classmates, or, trying to take the awkwardness out of it. And so basically I taught what's that?
What did you call it?
I just said, thanks for letting me be here as a guest teacher for PE today, and brought in Sound Off Colorado.
That always helps.
Tried to make a playlist that I thought the kids would be into. But also finding songs without explicit lyrics is next to impossible.
Which happens to be what most of the kids are into.
Exactly. So I taught a PE class, basically. So fitness, Jillian style class. And at the end, taught some balance work and really cultivating focus, some seated stretching, and then some breath work at the end, including this one particular technique that I learned at a training with Holistic Life Foundation this summer called Stress Breath, and talked about how much stress these kids are dealing with in their lives at school, but also outside. And you can take this anywhere with you. You can do it in math class. You can do it at home when you're fighting with your sister. You can do it anywhere, and nobody needs to know that you're doing it. So it was reasonably successful enough to where they invited me back to do it again.
Awesome.
But one of the kids afterwards, in talking with them, got many teenage responses. Fine, whatever. I feel good. It's cool. Typical teenage responses. And one teenage boy offered his experience to me, which I thought was a miracle in and of itself.
Was this in a group or to you
This
personally?
is after the class. He came up to myself and the guys from Sound Off, and he said, "Yo, miss, that was tight." And I smiled and said, "Awesome, man. Tell me what you liked about it so I know for the future." And he was like, "I really dig that breathing stuff. I'd be forgetting to breathe all the time." It's like, you and me both, man. And so we had a good laugh about that. And it just it felt so good to have, there it is. It happened in one kid, even if it was just one.
It's huge.
So I'm glad I get to go back and do that again. And it's super fun.
Awesome.
And really uncomfortable for me.
Well, it makes us grow, right?
Absolutely.
I don't even want to recommend people going back to the first episode. Not that, I'm mastered by craft by any means, but there's definitely been a huge learning curve.
Yeah.
Before we move on, I want to ask you about the stress breath. Would you mind walking us through it real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to frame it, the Holistic Life Foundation, they're based in Baltimore, really amazing guys who are, I think, contacting 10,000 kids a week in Baltimore public schools and doing all sorts of amazing things. But their language is 100% secular versus yoga terminology of Ujjayi breath and those sorts of things, which I can appreciate from a receptivity standpoint. So if you would, close your eyes.
Sure.
And just see if you can start to observe your breath as it is. So can you feel it in your chest? Do you notice your neck doing a fair amount of the work? Can you direct more breath down into your belly? And then start to imagine your torso sort of like a balloon. So when you breathe in, it expands top to bottom, side to side, front and back. And when you exhale, let go of so much of the air that the balloon shrinks back to its original shape. And breathe in, expand it as much as you can, and empty all of it. We're going to add one more step. Breathe in, expand 3-dimensionally, hold at the top. Bring your chin and your chest towards one another. Hold for just 3, 2, 1. Now lift your head, exhale everything out. And pause just briefly. Breathe in, fill yourself up. Hold at the top, chin and chest towards each other. 3, 2, 1. Lift your chin, exhale all the breath out. And then again, breathe in, stretch out the breath as much as you can. Hold it, chin and chest towards each other. 3, 2, 1. Lift your chin, exhale everything out. And just one more round like this. Breathe in, expand that balloon in every direction. Hold at the top, chin and chest towards each other. 3, 2, 1. Exhale completely. And now just easy breath in and out. And observe if it's any easier, if it takes any less effort to breathe. If you notice a difference in the energy in your body, maybe a change in the pace of your mind. When you're ready, blink your eyes open. How do you feel?
I love it.
Good.
Yeah. I did my meditation just maybe an hour before we linked up, but I love sinking back into it and using it. And I think a lot of people identify yoga and meditation as something that you do is like, this is like this 10-minute to 1 hour session that's going to relieve all my stress for the day.
Right.
And what they don't realize is like both yoga and meditation are practices, and the game where it matters is once you leave the mat or leave the meditation bolster, and having that on hand and realizing that even 30 seconds of concentrated breath can really shift your perspective, can take you off of that boiling point.
Absolutely.
It's so huge. Now I'm all zenned out and I don't even know where to take the show. Well, just having you guide me through it. You've got such a great voice for it, and using the balloon analogy, 3-dimensional, these are all terms that they're not controversial in any way. Not to say that the Sanskrit is, it's just...
But it can be divisive.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you feel like someone's speaking a different language in front of you, and you're like, what is this person saying?
Right.
That can always be a little alienating to people.
Yeah.
So how you compose it is very digestible.
Right.
I'm a big fan. So you teach that towards the end of the class. So it's first about kind of like getting the exercise, getting the movement in, kind of tricking. Right. Kind of like backdoor yoga sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So whether it's the kids have very scattered and frenetic energy or they're super low energy after sitting all day, I feel like the movement can help either wake them up or burn off that busyness so that then they're willing to try some of the breathing techniques and mindfulness techniques.
So you mentioned earlier that you have your morning routine, your coffee, your meditation, and you're out the door. Are you living just kind of like a mobile lifestyle right now with your work daily?
Yes. So I teach at a couple different studios. I'm a physical therapist as well. But like I had mentioned to you before we got started, simplest business model ever. No brick and mortar space. But I go and see people in their homes or work out of one of the studios I teach at, have neutral ground there that I can work on people. So it's great to have the option for both. And then, schools and lead teacher trainings at the studio that I teach at downtown. And so it's lots of moving parts, but I love it.
Do you have a consistent day bag. This is my physical therapy bag. This is my yoga bag.
Yeah.
This is my teacher bag.
Yeah. So when I was buying my most recent car, I just got a Subaru Impreza at the end of last year, the hatchback, and had to bring my massage table with me to see if it fits in the back of the car with the seats up, or if I have to ride around with the seats down all the time. So I wanted to get a smaller car. And so the guys at the lot said, "I'm sorry, you need to do what?" Said, I need to put this table in there and see if it fits.
I feel like the Subaru guys in Colorado would probably be like, "Oh yeah, we have a fitting center right over here." You know,
right? We've measured that already.
For whatever, you know, you need to get your surfboard, you need to get your wakeboard or your kayak, anything.
Yeah. So the trunk has the massage table and sheets and blocks and straps and yoga mats and then there's always the lunch bag and all the other things that come with.
Right.
Yeah. So loaded up for the day.
When I was in high school, my first car, total beater, it died right before I'd already been accepted to the school that I went to for college, and I didn't have enough money to buy a new car, and my parents were in this position of being like, well, we either need to pay for plane tickets when we want to see our son, or we need to buy a new car. I'd also, for about a year at that point, been playing bass guitar, and there was a stand-up bass in jazz band as well as electric bass, and I already kind of preferred electric bass just because I was a teenager and wanted to play more like Red Hot Chili Peppers and less Miles Davis. But I was beginning to learn upright bass, and the idea of, am I going to buy a car that can fit a giant upright bass? But I was like, I don't want like a Subaru or like a Suburban or something like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. I didn't even know what a Subaru was back then, but I grew up in Ohio, so everybody had these big early 2000s SUVs, and I was like, I still don't want that. So that's what caused me to play electric bass rather than stand up, was the car, just like 15 years ago or however long it was.
That's great.
So I totally feel your pain on that.
Yeah.
Do you have trouble feeling rooted? Because for me, like where we are right now, it's important that I have at least one space that I can really get into my flow state. And traveling so much earlier this year, it's easy to feel kind of flighty, and you don't have your space. You kind of have to kind of create it as you go. How do you feel about that?
I agree 100%. And that is a big part of why I need to make sure that I sit. Oftentimes in between clients, I'll get in the car and do a little bit of breathing. So I'm originally from Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. And have you heard the term massholes?
Oh, of course. I have a lot of masshole friends.
Yeah. So aggressive drivers, sort of notorious, right? Lived in Vail for 10 or 11 years, came down to Denver. It was not the bustling metropolis that it is now. Yeah. So traffic can bring me right back into my masshole history. So I really have to...
You're like revisiting it from decades ago?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I really need to check myself with the road rage. And
traffic is such a tell of your mental state.
Gosh, 100%. And so I definitely need to stop in the car and do some breathing and reset myself. And almost sometimes, because you're working with people, whether it's with physical limitations or physical pain or specific goals or chronic pain, or just simply spending time one-on-one with people, an hour one-on-one once a week or twice a week sometimes is more than people get with their significant others. So you really develop relationships with people. Totally. And it can be challenging to not take on their challenges throughout the course of a day. So in addition to being scattered physically in my day, it can start to feel heavier as well. So sort of clearing things when I get into the car so that I can start fresh with the next person is a necessary practice.
Absolutely.
A lot of times for me.
Do you find yourself pulling over or waiting till you get to the place and then just not getting out of the car and doing a quick meditation? Or do you do like a kind of a driving meditation, obviously not with your eyes closed?
Yeah, right.
I'll do that. I'll do some kind of just focusing on my breath while driving. And sometimes because I have a meditation practice, I do start to drop in a little bit, almost too much. Yeah. Which is not safe at all. Yeah. I suppose it's still probably safer than texting.
It's probably true.
But I'm just curious because I love the idea of like little life hacks like that, of just quick resets throughout the day to get yourself ready. Because we, in America, we go from exercise to meetings to
Absolutely. One thing
concentrated
to the
creative
next.
time to emails to we have to wear so many hats, and it's so hard to just switch that over. And then, like you said, the emotional baggage that comes from just caring for others, whether it's professionally or socially, you can't help but take on some of this weight, and it's so crucial to have a release.
Yeah. Most often for me, it's right when I get in the car. And if that doesn't feel available, sometimes I'll drive and find a different spot and take 3 minutes with the radio volume off, the car off, the phone away from me, and just like breathe. And sometimes it's easy, steady breath, like what I talked you through. Sometimes it's a little bit more dramatic. I don't know if you've experienced lion's breaths ever in your yoga practice.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be that dramatic where you're really forcing that release. It just depends on the day and it depends on the experience, but usually not while the car's moving.
Sure. Thank you for not contributing to the dangerous Denver driving. That's interesting. I feel like there's been such a huge upswing in breath work, and I absolutely love breathing through, in meditation. But I find that in the pranayama or the breathing exercises that kind of bookend yoga classes, I don't seem to get as much reward from them or just as much of a desired feeling as other people do. And I'm wondering if that is very common or if it's something that is more unique to just me. I don't know if it's an intention thing.
Are there specific breath techniques that you're thinking of?
What comes to mind for me is I've kind of just programmed myself at this point that as soon as I'm on the mat and we start getting into a vinyasa, I'm doing
that ujjayi breath.
Yes. And that's just kind of how I associate the yoga practice.
Yeah.
So that's just more natural, and that is what I do when I'm doing yoga.
Yeah.
However, at the end of a hot yoga class, when we do the
breath of fire,
I do it, but I don't seem to feel any release. I've also tried the Wim Hof method. I don't find this huge release mentally or physically. It just doesn't seem to happen for me.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's something I'm missing or if that's just common.
Oftentimes, just like we talked about in the physical postures, the more you do those, the more you refine the awareness of what's happening. But for me, breath of fire, Kapalabhati, different names for it, I tend to feel that Kapalabhati is much more invigorating for me. So I tend to do it more at the beginning of a practice, or maybe somewhere in the middle if I'm really trying to cultivate connection to the core, but it creates a lot of heat for me. So I tend to do it, like I said, to get things moving at the beginning, and do things like lengthened, extended exhales at the end of a practice. Cooling breaths like Sitali, Holistic Life Foundation calls it taco breath.
Okay, I've never done that
making
before.
Folding your tongue, which some people can do and some people can't do genetically. Actually, it's really interesting. But those breaths more towards the end versus Kapalabhati. There's really endless things you can do with pranayama. And I think some things everyone will experience differently. There can be the intention. So I know my experience with Kapalabhati as heat producing and sort of buzzing, getting me out of my head and a little bit more into the experience of my body. But I don't know what your experience is like in your body. So I can have the intention of doing that at the beginning of class for the reasons that I know, but not everyone's going to have that experience. And I think that's totally okay. And you start to get, I think, more connected to the things that really work for you for specific purposes. And that might be one that just doesn't work for you for that purpose.
Kind of fundamentally, I think I hear these wise words, find what you really love or that what comes natural to you and just really dive headfirst into that lifestyle. I've also heard starting a business or whatever you do, you're going to run into roadblocks and things that make you uncomfortable, and how you succeed is by approaching those head on and jumping over them. And it seems like breath work is kind of an example of that right now. Do I go with what feels right or do I challenge myself to take on something that is not comfortable for me in order to kind of graduate to another level.
Yeah. Well, I think you just brought up some really fundamental principles of the practice of yoga. Abhyasa is constant practice, and Vairagya is releasing dispassion, if you will, which is sort of an interesting combination and one that I think many people have challenges reconciling. So constant practice where we're striving for whatever it is that we're striving for, whatever the passion is, and we're doing the things that we can to move in that direction. We will encounter challenges and roadblocks and those sorts of things. And so how do we continue to strive and do the best that we can, but then know when we need to soften the grip and release the results? So it's a really simple principle, not so easy.
That concept comes up all the time. Simple does not mean easy.
Yeah.
Once again, I was hoping there would be a
have it all figured out today.
Answers like, just do this type of breath, don't do that, and you're good.
All the answers.
Well, going back to your mindfulness classes and yoga in schools, I see that these, like, yoga is starting to kind of pop up as like kind of like an addendum or some sort of extracurricular in a lot of programs. One of the former guests, Taylor, was bringing it to finance conventions and kind of like it's starting to creep into almost every industry.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, since you're on the front line, what can some of these conventional industries do to further that? They obviously recognize that it has such utility in the wellness of the people that they're involved with. How does it become a permanent staple?
Well, I think first companies in a given industry need to be invested in their people and in the communities that they're in. Because if there isn't that foundation, then there's no way that implementing a program of yoga and mindfulness will work. So that foundation needs to be there. But I think we're in a time where there's such a wealth of knowledge that's coming forth as to the science of mindfulness, the effects on brain physiology, such as an increase in gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that does executive functioning, that overrides the sort of impulsive, instinctual part of our brain.
Interesting.
That someone wrongs you or cuts you off in traffic and you say, you want to.
Immediately heightened.
Exactly.
Like your sympathetic nervous system is kicked on.
Fight or flight or freeze.
Okay.
That system gets kicked on and your prefrontal cortex says, take a deep breath. It's not worth causing an accident. So you get more power in that section of the brain. In children, starting to see that there's an increase in the hippocampus, areas associated with memory and learning, less activation in places like the amygdala, the limbic system, which is where that fight or flight or freeze response comes from. And so there's a wealth of reputable research now, and of course we need more, but there's a wealth of research that can be referred to say that these are the benefits for your community, your employees, your students, etc. And there are innumerable yoga teachers in Denver, all of which who are trying to make it work and who are really passionate about what they do. And so I think whether it's reaching out to studios to look for someone to host a class at an office, for example, once a week at lunch, or I think there's easy ways to reach out because we have such a full yoga market here in Denver and lots of people who want to share it.
We're so lucky to have just a plethora. I mean, every day there's events and dozens of awesome studios out there. It can be intimidating. For a brief stint, I was considering a career in yoga teaching. I have my training, but there's just so many people like yourself that are just so talented and have an affinity for it. And I like being more conscientious student than being a teacher. And I think that a lot of people who go through teacher training graduate with that sort of feeling.
Agreed.
It's really encouraging that now that the science is showing it's not just woo-woo, feel-good sort of stuff. It's tangibly affecting both adults and children.
Right.
And I think that it's just a matter of time, this kind of inevitable changing of the guard. As I like to think about it, there's a lot of conventional wisdom in America that is like slowly kind of fading out. And for a lot of the younger generations, it's not happening quick enough. And a lot of the older generations are hanging on for dear life. Not to necessarily say that some of the old ways are bad. Some of the family values, the things that we really treasured in the previous generations are kind of slipping through our fingers. And there's a lot of family traditions, eating around a table for a meal.
Right.
These things are huge and they're community building, and we're kind of letting those go by the wayside to promote mindfulness techniques and more connectivity online and all the things that are coming with the newer generation. We're going to find a happy medium soon, I hope. And I think that companies like Lululemon, who I know you work with, are on the forefront of that. I mean, they are essentially a yoga and athletics company, but they're doing so much to promote
their people.
Yeah, like campaigns like yours in the communities. I didn't know that about Lululemon until I started meeting people like yourself and other ambassadors. They're such a huge company and they're known globally now, yet they have attention to each community that they're a part of.
They do, and to their employees, regardless of the level of employee, they're doing constant work as far as self-development, which I think is really wonderful, and investing time to allow for people to do that sort of work. And it does feel like a really wonderful community to be a part of, where it's not just about the bottom line. I think that's probably a benefit, a perk, but they really are seeking to develop people, which I can attest to. They've helped me do trainings and promote the programming that I'm doing. So it's been a really wonderful partnership.
Well, I hope more companies are taking that sort of thing on.
Yeah.
Especially with Lulu, they're just so very trendy. It's a type of company that people want to be wearing their clothes, and they want, promotes a healthy and active lifestyle. And for them to have such a connection to their communities, just very smart. It seems to come from the heart.
Yeah.
So backing up a little bit, just getting to know you for the last hour or so, you are so knowledgeable in so many aspects of mindfulness and physical health. Where did this passion start, and what was the first stepping stone for you?
I was a gymnast growing up, and I injured myself plenty of times. Fortunately, nothing catastrophic, but was in physical therapists' offices many times. My mother was a PE teacher in my hometown, and she basically knew the whole town. And let me take you to see one of my former students. So I'd end up in these offices, and I remember being, I don't know, maybe 13, 14, somewhere along there. And I remember this man asking me many questions, and my thought process at the time was, okay, you go to the doctor's office, you get your blood drawn, you get an x-ray taken for them to figure out what's wrong with you. And this man knows what's wrong with me just by asking me questions.
Yeah.
Wow. And being very, very impressed by that. So that's how I ended up pursuing physical therapy. And I think I really am passionate about helping people with their pain. But of course, a big part of that is recognizing the patterns that we have. So movement patterns, postural patterns, the ways that we spend our time throughout the course of our day, and how that contributes to the pain that we're having. Because I can do manual therapy, which I love, hands-on work all day until the cows come home. But if the patterns don't change, then nothing changes. And same is true for yoga. And that, I think, is what really pulled me into wanting to learn more and wanting to teach, was this idea of recognizing patterns within myself. After a very challenging time in my life, I started yoga casually, I would say, in college, and didn't really pursue it until I was going through a divorce, and was at yoga at least once a day, really dove in.
Oh yeah, the early days.
And had this, I don't know what's happening inside of me or why this is happening, but this is the one place that I feel like I can be kind to myself. The one place where I can stop that running tape that is beating myself up constantly. And so what do I need to do now? And my great friend, Amy Baker, said, you need to go do a teacher training. And so I did, and had zero plans to teach, but came back to Vail after doing my teacher training with Anna Forrest. And she said, let's get together. And we had coffee and tell me everything. And told her all about it. She's like, great. I go on vacation next week. You're teaching all of my classes.
All right.
And she knew at the time that I wasn't capable of saying no to her. And so here I am teaching yoga 10, 11 years later. I think that the synergy is really wonderful. The knowledge of anatomy and biomechanics, but also the perspective of the internal patterns that we can have and how the physical wellness can really meld with the mindfulness and internal wellness piece. And so for the most part, I feel like they inform each other really well. And it's always something that is shifting for me in my own body and in my own life, but also in the ways that I'm approaching the clients that I'm working with and what they have going on in their lives. So it's not stagnant. It's problem solving. It's dynamic. It's really listening to people, letting them be heard, and again, trying to give them tools to manage their pain, but to also shift the patterns that are contributing to that.
It's also connected, right? Sometimes it takes decades to figure out the connection to mind to body. Obviously, going back to the beginning of the episode, it starts with understanding that you don't have it figured out, and continuing to be curious is one of the most powerful tools you have. Is continue to learn and want to grow, improve yourself from yesterday.
Yeah.
It's not about being better than the other people in the room. It's not about some new record or a sales record or something like that. It's about just improving day in, day out. I have a hard time personally when I'm trying to further myself and really tune in to what my body's telling me, where I am in my life, what is the most important thing for me to do on a daily level, stepping back and looking from like a bird's eye view on, am I moving in the straightest line towards my ultimate lifestyle goals? It makes it harder for me to listen to others. And in your profession, you have to balance both of those. Do you find that that can be a difficult challenge or that they bolster each other?
I think that having to spend so much time listening to other people has made me better at listening to myself. Because I think for a very long time, a lot of my life, there was not listening to myself. There was doing what I was supposed to do, sort of thing, at the expense of my own happiness or wellness. So fitting the mold or checking the right things off the list. So I think over time, listening to others, but I think yoga has been such a huge tool for me to shift that, to be able to feel and to listen to whether I'm moving in the right direction versus it being so cognitive for me, because I can go round and round and round and round in rationalizing and considering both sides, and it feels like a rabbit hole for sure. And so the pausing long enough to listen has created the biggest changes for me. And I do it every day with the people that I work with, but have to remind myself to do it for myself too. In
this culture, it's very easy to start to develop codependence patterns where you're constantly serving other people's agendas. I mean, a lot of it is falling into a full-time job, working like in the traditional education system and traditional working systems. It's based on a hierarchy where there is the needs of a company and you're required to fulfill that. And I think that psychologically, it starts to lock you into when somebody puts something in front of me, that is my job. And that translates into social patterns. My friend would be so upset if I don't come to her happy hour. So I must do that, as opposed to like, what do I really, really need? How do I fill my own cup? Do you have any advice or suggestions to people who are starting this journey of mindfulness and body awareness? It seems just like any project, so hard to just get started. It seems like such a mountain to climb. Yeah.
I think that because it does feel like such a mountain to climb, it can be hard to remember that it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be simple, which again, not so easy, but simple in the sense that you could spend 3 minutes on your lunch break in your car breathing, away from your computer, away from the ringing phones, away from all of the other stimulation. 3 minutes. You could, if you are juggling home and work and kids, you could stand at the sink and wash your dishes in the most mindful way. You feel the temperature of the water. You feel the texture of what you're holding. You feel your feet on the floor. You feel your posture while you're holding the dishes. You can develop awareness in any number of activities. It doesn't mean that you have to spend an hour on a yoga mat. It doesn't mean that you need to set up an altar in your home. It can be really, really simple. So whether it's the seated morning practice or the during the day pauses, or I know a lot of people have a really hard time winding down at the end of the day. It could be getting an app like Simple Habit or Headspace, where you can let someone guide you through a meditation prior to sleep, yoga nidra, things that, again, will help take you out of that thinking intellectual mind and bring you into more of that feeling experience. So those are just simple ideas based on, some people are morning people, some people are night people, but there, I think, are ways regardless of how you structure your day to fit it in.
I think that in the beginning, it's very important to prioritize it to get a habit started.
Right.
And then as that proceeds, realizing the importance of finding little nooks and crannies in the day. Just like you said, whether it's cleaning dishes, driving, or a dedicated practice at the end. Personally, I find that winding down, it's easier for me to start the day with meditation. It's a bit more of a challenge in the evening. And I know that a lot of people feel the same way. They get off work, they maybe go exercise or do something social in the day with normally screens.
Right.
And we desperately want to just shut off for a second. But I really don't think that getting onto screens is shutting off as much as it is just turning the channel, or turning the channel to something that is just so stimulating that we get to get out of our normal thought process for a while.
Right. Yeah.
Totally
I think it's
different.
Tuning out from our
Very
experience rather than tuning in.
Yeah, well put. That's awesome. I can only encourage people to find just something, whether it's unique or more of a traditional way to start a habit, just finding it.
Yeah.
I personally have recently found those 3 minutes before going into social events. Growing up, I've been more of an extrovert, I'd say, but in the last few years, between traveling and having more passion for my work, I really have enjoyed being by myself more.
Too, yeah.
It's so treasured. And now when I'm getting ready to go into big social engagement, I get a little nervous. And I think that's very natural.
Yeah.
Just to meet new people, to present yourself well. And I found that 3 minutes on the park bench outside of the bar or studio or whatever it is, it really shifts this experience. And especially if you're setting an intention to, like, I want to go in there and make just one genuine connection is fine. Even knowing that maybe 5 will be kind of small talk, surface, and you'll move on. One genuine connection is so valuable.
Yeah.
And it's what we're on this planet for. So establishing a mindfulness practice is crucially important no matter in what capacity you start. What about starting down the path of working in yoga or physical therapy, just more of like your area of expertise? It's like here we have so much competition.
Right.
There's so many different paths of education and certification that you can go down. And I feel like just like in anything, a lot of them can be procrastination methods. No, I'm not going to start working because I should take another course. I need to do this, that, the other, right? What do you recommend to the up-and-comers?
I think first you need to have a feeling of what resonates with you. So, for example, yoga in particular, there are so many different styles. And even within, for example, the style of vinyasa, there are endless iterations of it. There's power vinyasa, there's slower flow, and every teacher is going to be different in how they present that based on their background and their experience. So I think the shopping around is important. When people come to my training or to my studio looking to do training and they say, okay, I love vinyasa, it's all I want ever, vinyasa. So they go through their training, and I teach a lot of anatomy, biomechanics, those sorts of things throughout the training so that there's an understanding of the how and the why. And so it's never just a willy-nilly mishmash of poses thrown together, but it's very intentional. And as part of their continuing education, they have to go out and take 10 additional classes that are not vinyasa. and review them. So go take an Iyengar class, go take a Kundalini class, go to an Ashtanga class, go to a restorative class, go to Yoga Nidra. One, so that you hopefully instill continuing curiosity, that it's not that you did the 200-hour training and
Right.
I'm a yoga teacher now, you know,
Right.
But that continued curiosity to understand what's out there, to be able to answer questions of your students who say, what is Kundalini? It sounds weird. And you go, I don't know, unacceptable. Get out there and experience all of it so that you have an intelligent response, but more so that you add more tools to your toolbox. You continue to develop as a teacher. You continue to refine what fits for you. And so you develop your own style, and you're not parroting one teacher that you've been going to for 10 years and haven't branched outside of that. We already have those teachers in the world. What are you bringing to the table? And so I think really shopping around is a big part of it prior to doing a training, but also doing a training that really fits the goals that you're looking for. So it might be an in-depth study of the practice and the philosophy of yoga, in which case you want a training that is very philosophy heavy. Some people want anatomy and biomechanics. Some people want subtle body, chakras, koshas, those sorts of things. Some people really want to teach, and others know that they don't want to teach. So that can really guide where you choose to do a training. But I think more than anything, it's that the learning has to be continuous, that it doesn't stop at the end of any training, that we always remain students first.
Yeah, well put.
Thanks.
Keri, that's awesome. I'm looking at the timer, and we've already been going over an hour.
Oh.
It flies by, right?
It does.
When you start getting into it.
Yeah.
Where can people get in touch with you and get involved in what you're up to?
You can find me on Instagram, Keri Bergeron, KeriBergeron. You can find me at Yoga Pod Loto in Denver, Pura Vida in Denver, shortly at The River Yoga that's opening in 5 Points in mid-October. And my website is KeriBergeron.com.
Very well-rounded. You've captured the Keri Bergeron very well. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you
and
for
sharing
having
your
me.
story. Yeah,
I appreciate it.
It's been a lot of fun. Yeah,
Absolutely.
We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Seth.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening to the Mindful Millennial Podcast. If you loved this episode, check out some of the other MindMill episodes. They're all free and available at themindmill.com and on all the major podcast platforms. Also, please take a second and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It's incredibly easy, and it really is the best way to help the show. Stay tuned for more MindMill episodes coming down the line. I'll keep them interesting for you, I promise. Take it easy.